more than 200. This is NPR.
And you're
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Andrea Salcido. Governor Andrew Cuomo is coming under a fire today after holding a fundraiser during budget season. The New York Times reported on the $25,000 per couple dinner. The event was held 2 weeks before the state budget is due. Some of the people who attended include the president of a school bus company that wanted tax breaks, according to the New York Times. On WYNC Radio today, Cuomo defended the dinner and said other legislators are doing the same thing.
Have I done fundraising? Yes. Has Andrea Stewart-Cousins done fundraising? Yes.
Doesn't make it
Has
right.
Mike Giannaris done fundraising? Yes. Has Carl Hasty done fundraising? Yes. Everybody has, because you're in a business now where not only is it legal, it's sort of mandatory to remain in office, so you have to change the system.
Cuomo also announced today he will be running for a fourth term in office. Brooklyn police released a video today showing a group of men chasing a man before he was fatally shot. The video was released in an effort to apprehend the men responsible for the murder of the 21-year-old man. One man has been arrested in connection to the crime. The Department of Transportation announced that at least 10 new city bike docks will be placed in Bushwick by April 27th. The exact locations are yet to be disclosed. The bike docks are in addition to the various valet and temporary stations that are expected to be installed in the next few months. Drivers crossing the MTA bridges and tunnels will be charged more as of Sunday. The new fare will cost $6.12 if you own an EZ Pass. Non-EZ Pass users will now pay $9.50. Additionally, starting on April 21st, subway riders would not receive a bonus when adding multiple riders at a time. It's 56 degrees in Central Park with a chance of showers for this afternoon. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Andrea Salcido.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Maggie Green.
And I'm Maddie Foley. On Monday, New York state lawmakers are expected to approve a ban on single-use plastic bags. Many environmentalists are claiming the ban as a victory, but for businesses, it's a mixed bag.
Sachi McClendon talked to grocery store owners and plastic bag distributors to see what the ban means for them.
Wasim Maleb runs Samad's Gourmet on the Upper West Side. His small grocery store gives out about 300 single-use plastic bags a day to customers. Most of them are buying breakfast or picking up lunch for later in the day. He says many of his customers love these plastic bags.
They buy one thing for like $1, I would say. They'll take a paper bag, plastic bag, and like another plastic bag to double the bag, just in case.
Maleb says 15% of his business expenses go to providing these packaging products. Right now, he gives his customers a choice of paper or plastic bags. But when the ban goes into effect next March, he will only provide paper bags, which cost a lot more.
Well, if you have 1,000 of the plastic bag, the shopping bag probably will cost you $20 or so. If you buy 1,000 paper bags, it will cost you like $40-something.
Just a block away from Samad's is another grocery store, a much bigger one, West Side Market. Inside, by the cash registers, there are piles and piles of single-use bags. They go through thousands of them every day. Ian Joskowitz is the general manager of West Side Market. He originally hoped to tackle the ban with new, thicker bags.
We're going to try their 8mm reusable plastic bags, but you can use them like forever.
However, Joskowitz learned earlier today that the new ban goes so far as to get rid of all plastic bags, even the thicker ones he was going to use. Now he says he will most likely just use paper bags, but we'll explore more options. Jenny Bowers is an environmental lawyer and expert on carry-out bag policy. While she thinks banning plastic bags is an important step, it doesn't do enough to deal with the larger issue of single-use bag culture.
Retailers really don't want to upset the status quo, so we will probably see retailers giving away paper bags for free.
Under the new ban, though, counties have the option to charge consumers a 5-cent fee for paper bags. Ultimately, the only way to get people to bring reusable bags is to hit their wallets.
The fee on paper is where we're really going to see customers shifting to bringing their own bags rather than just taking whatever is available.
In the coming months, counties will decide whether or not to charge for this 5-cent fee. Sachi McClendon, Columbia Radio News.
Earlier this month, Ireland changed its law on domestic violence. Coercive control is now a crime. That's when someone intimidates, degrades, isolates, controls, or abuses a partner. The UK has similar laws.
But here in the United States, the Trump administration has narrowed the definition of domestic violence. Lauren Lantry investigates the impact this change has had on survivors.
About a year ago, the Department of Justice changed the definition of domestic violence on its website. It used to be about 400 words long and included things like emotional, psychological, sexual, and economic abuse. Now, that definition is about 100 words and only includes felony and misdemeanor crimes of violence. The terms emotional or psychological abuse were completely erased from the website. The change got very little media coverage.
By the U.S. Attorney's Office in
There was a lot going on when the change was made last April. The FBI raided Michael Cohen's office.
Mueller, according to Cohen's lawyer,
Paul Ryan
to vote to re-elect.
announced he wasn't going to run for re-election.
So that's why I'm announcing this today.
So that may be why there was very little media coverage. But experts who work in the field say they were shocked. Esther Lim is a senior staff attorney at Heard Justice in Manhattan. She works mostly with immigrants who have experienced domestic violence.
They took the broader definition out and made it what everybody traditional thinks as domestic violence. You get hit, you get kicked, you get pushed. It's none of the psychological, emotional.
But here's the thing. While the definition changed, the law didn't. Domestic violence is a crime under state law, not federal law. Esther reads to me from the New York Family Offenses Legal Code.
Family court and the criminal courts shall have concurrent jurisdiction.
Even in progressive states like New York and California,
obstruction of breathing,
emotional abuse isn't included in the legal definition of domestic violence.
Attempted assault, identity.
So why does it matter if the DOJ website changed its definition? Well, Lim says that for many survivors, it's actually the emotional, psychological trauma that's worse.
Maybe they get hit once or twice, they say. But it's the daily barrage of constant badgering, constant belittling, constant control, like the emotional control that is what is hurtful the most.
A survey in New Zealand found that women who were emotionally abused had considered or attempted suicide.
You know, the federal government is in a position to set a national floor.
That's Julie Goldscheid. She's a professor at CUNY Law School in New York. She's been working on issues of gender violence since the 1980s. Goldscheid says that the federal government is sending the wrong message.
That said, I think it signals a problematic shift in focus, whereas the Office on Violence Against Women previously had a broader definition and recognized the collateral consequences of abuse.
So while a state like New York never legally recognized emotional abuse, lawyers say they did cite the federal definitions in court to help an argument for a client. It wasn't binding, but at least it was something. Experts say that before the change, women were already reluctant to report domestic abuse. For example, in 2017, in 61% of all domestic violence homicide cases in the city, there was no contact with the police within the year leading up to the murder. Sally McNichol says the change has sent a dangerous and damaging message. She's the co-director of Connect, a nonprofit organization that helps prevent interpersonal violence. We met at a cafe downtown.
People feel unsafe. People feel uncertain. That has a huge effect on whether you're going to reach out, how you're going to seek help, who you're going to talk to, who you're going to tell.
A representative from the Justice Department says the current definition reflects what is written in the Violence Against Women Act. And that's true. But when I asked why the definition changed on the website, they had no comment. Experts say this move was especially egregious at a time when domestic violence numbers are up in New York in the last year. To put things into perspective, across the country, every minute, 20 people experience intimate partner violence. So since you've been listening, 80 people have been physically abused. Lauren Lantry, Columbia Radio News.
The number of homeless students in New York City has reached an all-time high. 1 student out of 10 is homeless. That's according to Advocates for Children of New York.
For many, even making it to school each day is a challenge. Now, funding for a city program that helps these students might get cut from next year's budget. Alex Coletta has more.
Students living in temporary housing face particular challenges that most students don't. Patricia Brichta is a special education liaison at a public school in East Harlem. Her school has about 90 homeless students out of 400.
I see these kids come to school tired, dirty, haven't slept well. You know, having your own room is this crazy luxury. These kids don't have their own bed.
Brichta says that living in these conditions can really wear a student down and have a lasting effect on their learning.
So when they come to school, they don't have the emotional capacity and the mental capacity to be focused and to care about school.
That's why 3 years ago, the Department of Education launched a program to support kids living in temporary housing. Bridging the Gap placed 69 social workers in schools with a high concentration of homeless students. Ben Anderson is the Director of Poverty and Health Policy at the Children's Defense Fund in New York. He says the social workers help students in a variety of ways, from making sure they're enrolled in health insurance and have access to nutritional assistance programs, to providing counseling.
Homeless children are much more likely to have experienced some sort of childhood trauma, be it witnessing domestic violence, experiencing physical or sexual abuse themselves.
Next year, that help might go away. In his preliminary budget, the mayor proposed eliminating the $13.9 million needed to run the program. But according to Anderson, that's money well spent.
We know, based on research, that providing social workers to students in the school setting is one of the more effective ways at ensuring that student needs are met.
A coalition of 17 organizations agree. Together, they've signed a letter asking the mayor to refund the program. We reached out to the mayor's office, but they didn't respond to requests for comment. New York City Councilman Mark Traeger questioned the logic of cutting the program at a budget hearing last week.
The program has been widely supported and lauded, not only by the council and advocates, but by DOE officials themselves.
Mayor de Blasio proposed the same cut last year, but restored it in the final budget after some backlash. This year, it's happening again.
There is a need, and I would say an urgent need, for additional social emotional supports in schools.
Randy Levine is the policy director at Advocates for Children of New York. She says that homeless students don't have enough support as it is.
We still have 100 schools with 50 or more students living in shelter that do not have a Bridging the Gap social worker. So we should be talking about how to increase the number of Bridging the Gap social workers, not proposing to cut the program.
Brichta agrees that cutting the program isn't the right move. She says it would have dire consequences for students and their families.
It's very sad. I think counselors and social workers are essential. You know, you can't learn if you're experiencing emotional and social problems. It can only make it worse for these kids and their families.
The mayor will announce a revised budget at the end of the next month. City Council will then hold hearings in May to discuss the budget before it's finalized. Alex Coletta, Columbia Radio News.
March Madness, the annual collegiate basketball tournament, begins this week. I spoke with sports writer Cassandra Negley about our conversations around women's basketball and how they affect the sport's visibility. So Cassandra Negley, contributor at Yahoo Sports, thank you for coming on our show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So let's start from the beginning. I saw earlier this week that there was a tweet from the official NCAA March Madness Twitter account that started circulating, and it was complaining that there were no March Madness tournament games until Thursday. And then former NCAA player, current WNBA player, Breanna Stewart pointed out that there were actually a number of women's March Madness games being played throughout that week.
Yes, Stewie was referencing this tweet, and the account was the NCAA March Madness account. And she said that there's no respect given to the women's game, and how is that okay coming from the NCAA? And the idea is really just language to begin with. So when we say March Madness or are you watching the tournament, we think of the men. You know, are you watching Duke? Are you watching these games? And when we talk about the women's tournament, we say, you know, as I just did, the women's tournament.
What do you think needs to change here?
We really need to stop doing that. It's the men's tournament and the women's tournament. So that's kind of the first way that they're treated differently. And then, of course, you look at how they're just covered in general. I mean, now you have each men's game in its entirety on a different channel. So you can watch anything you want. The women's games are all aired, but they're all on ESPN, and you have to kind of sift through their app. But that's, you know, not great if you want to watch a whole game.
What effect does the lack of coverage on the games, on the brackets, have on the success and perception around women's basketball?
It's huge, and it's huge in a negative way. It is just harder to watch women's sports. So when we take away the coverage of women's sports, we take away viewership for that. But I do think that maybe in a few years we'll start to see some small differences.
Well, Cassandra Negley, thank you so much for chatting with us today about this. I really appreciate it.
Gladly. Thank you.
Voting for participatory budgeting starts tomorrow in over 30 New York City districts. In each district, voters will decide how they want to spend $1 million of the city council's budget. But as Camille Peterson finds, democracy is complicated.
The Participatory Budgeting Expo in Chelsea looks like a science fair. Community members set up 3-paneled poster boards on round tables, and as their neighbors circulate, they pitch their projects to them. Phyllis Waisman is pitching a few projects: improved park paths, better lighting for NYCHA parks, and repairing a playground sprinkler system. This is her 5th year working with participatory budgeting.
Oh, it's the most democratic process there is because the ideas start with the district and the community.
But she says participatory budgeting comes with limitations. To even get on the ballot, projects need to be approved by the city.
You're dealing with city agencies when you go through the vetting process, and they have a lot of do's and don'ts.
Then the projects have to get enough votes to win funding. After that, the winners are handed over to city bureaucracy. Lou Berta has voted on projects in Chelsea for a few years. He's keeping his eye on a $500,000 project to turn an empty lot into a park. It was approved in 2016.
So I'm looking to see where that's going to be spent. I've been bringing it up in some of our resident association meetings, but I've been told it's coming.
City Council Speaker Corey Johnson, who represents Chelsea, agrees the long wait times are a problem.
It's one thing that we hear not just on participatory budgeting, but we hear on any project that's being built in New York City.
City data shows that of the participatory budget projects approved between 2012 and 2017, only 8% have been completed. After projects win enough votes to get funding, they go through lengthy construction and approval processes within city agencies. Holly Russin-Gilman researches participatory budgeting at Columbia University. She says voters learn a lot about the challenges and frustrations of city government through participatory budgeting.
Often people are like, oh wow, that's more expensive than I thought, or that takes longer than I thought. They get to see how the sausage is made, and that is for better and for worse.
Even though Lou Berta is still waiting for that $500,000 project to happen, he's planning to vote on new projects this year, but he won't reveal his favorites.
I'm going to be a politician right now. I'm not going to dare even say what I've seen so far.
Voting starts tomorrow and ends April 7th. Camille Peterson, Columbia Radio News.
When reporter Moira Warburton was 14 years old, she was diagnosed with a condition that meant she needed hearing aids. Now, years later, she's coming to terms with the fact that she'll need them for the rest of her life.
High school sucked for me in all the usual awkward ways. I was growing hair in weird places, learning how to use a tampon, hormones raging. And to make things worse, I was losing my hearing. This is what a conversation sounds like for most people. Here's what it sounds like for me. I have an 80% hearing loss in my left ear and 60% in my right. Yeah, I'm pretty close to deaf. The 3 little bones connecting my eardrum to my cochlea grew too close together and can't vibrate properly. Usually that happens to people in their 50s. I was barely in my teens. I have autosclerosis. I had to look up what it's called for this piece. I never remember because I've always tried to pretend the condition doesn't exist for me. I was 14 when I was diagnosed. I was embarrassed by my existence to begin with at that age. Lots of kids get glasses, but hearing aids? I was so ashamed. They were like braces, but worse. At least other people had braces. No one had hearing aids. Mine were small and beige-colored. They sat just inside my ear canal and then curled around the back, but they were the bane of my existence. I remember sitting in class once, talking to the cute guy. You know the one. I was impressing myself at how casual I was being. We were sitting side by side, and then he saw them. I watched his face change, and I knew what he was thinking. They're for old people. I'm still wishing a hole opened up beside me and swallowed me up. It wasn't all bad. Turning my hearing aids off, I found, had its benefits. I could concentrate in tests with instant silence. I avoided countless fights with my parents by turning their voices into the teachers from Charlie Brown. Wah, 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 wah. But because I started from this place of shame, that's what defined the hearing aids for me. When I was first diagnosed, the doctors told me there was a surgery I could get when I was older and finished growing. So for the next 4 years, I told myself and everyone who asked that this was only temporary. Finally, when I was 19, I had the surgery. It didn't work. My bones were too tightly fused together. Now I'm 25. All my formative years with the hearing aids were spent figuring out how to hide them. I've had these things in my ears for over a decade, and I'm only just accepting that they'll be here for the rest of my life. I'm trying to find the words to explain to people what I need when I need it. I'm learning to speak up, telling people I have to have a different seat in a restaurant away from the speakers, explaining that I'm not being thoughtless, I just didn't hear. I wish I'd started this process earlier, of being comfortable with who I am. I wish I could go back and tell 14-year-old me, just own it. You'll find people cooler than the cute guy who don't care what's in your ears. You'll learn earlier than others to embrace things about yourself that you can't change. You'll end up working in radio, of all things. After all these years of trying to avoid them, your ears will become your biggest asset. And eventually, you'll get to a point where you introduce yourself with, "Hi, I'm Moira. Heads up, I'm not ignoring you. I just might not hear you." Moira Warburton, Columbia Radio News.
Tomorrow, Gotham City's masked hero Batman turns 80. The superhero made his debut in 1939, and since then, Batman has appeared on comic book pages and the big screen as both a lighthearted hero and a deeply troubled vigilante.
But one thing that's never changed, his status as an American icon. I talked with Travis Langley, a professor at Henderson State University in Arkansas, and a self-titled superheroologist about the legacy of Batman. Good morning, Travis.
Good morning.
So, what was our world like when Batman caught his first perp in 1939?
So, not too far behind had been Prohibition and Depression, and the gangsters in the 1930s seemed to be very successful in making fools of the police. And people had a lot of things they were worried about. In fact, there was a lot of awareness that the world was heading toward a very possible war. It was a time that they saw as crisis and tension. And in this time, this era, you want somebody to be able to step up and do the right thing. We always want somebody to step up and do the right thing. We always need heroes, fantastic heroes, people who operate outside the limits of the law were something that appealed to people. They had this the fascination with rebel heroes. And this is the climate in which these characters come along. Of course, in 1938, Superman comes along and starts the superhero genre in comics.
Since Superman popped up, obviously, people want to try to get their stake in the game. But why was Batman relevant at that time when Superman is the man that can do everything?
Well, there is a point where we realize nobody with godlike powers is going to fly out of the sky to help us. And we can believe that, maybe somebody in the darkness can step out to help us. We want somebody to step out of the darkness and do the right thing, and that's believable. Yeah. Superman, fun stories, fantastic stories, wonderful stories. Wouldn't it be great if there were a Superman? But we know there's no Superman. Well, maybe there could be a Batman. Detective Comics number 1000 happens to be coming out right about the time of Batman's 80th anniversary.
Right. So they're releasing their 1000th issue, which, Batman showed up in issue 27. How has he evolved over 973 issues?
The character changes with the times. Obviously, there's the lighter stuff for kids in the 50s. There's the campier stuff around the time of the Adam West TV show. It gets more serious in the 70s and, more violent later in the 80s. And it adapts to the time. It changes with the time. There's a core to this character. He is this guy who went through some kind of tragedy And he both wants to take out his anger about that. You know, every thug he slugs is a pitiful substitute for the one who killed his parents. But as most writers write him, he's driven more to keep others from going through what he went through. If he has a choice between saving that person and stopping that criminal, he's going to go save that person. Of course, he dresses up like a bat. He decided somehow that's the logical and reasonable thing to do. And that made Batman more believable. You know, throughout history, throughout the world, there are places where people do need to wear a mask to do the right thing, where people do need anonymity. It may be, you know, the handle that you're using online is your anonymity. It may be, you know, a bandana you're using to cover your face so that the corrupt police in your third world nation won't know who you are and track you down when you go over to help somebody. You know, there are situations in which people have to anonymously do the right thing.
Is that why Batman is relevant today?
Batman is relevant because we always need heroes. Post 9/11, there became this increased awareness of we want heroes, people actively using that word so strongly, even as we're also in the age of the internet that tears them down rapidly. So part of the appeal of this fictional hero is that nobody can completely tear the character down. We can have our own personal Batman in a way that we can't with the real life heroes. And he can stay true for us.
So you mentioned 9/11, which is obviously, you know, always on our mind in New York City. Batman lives in Gotham City. New York has historically been called Gotham. So what would the Batman of New York City look like in 2019?
The Batman of New York City, it gets a little harder to believe a guy's going in and out of New York City and nobody knowing where that fantastic car of his is going. Batman would still be very true to who he is. Yeah, you definitely would have, make sure he has the bulletproofing in the outfit. But I had long said that if you take the costume, take the toys, all that stuff away, plant him in the middle of nowhere, he's still Batman.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Langley. I really appreciate it. This has been great.
Oh, thank you.
Happy birthday to Bruce Wayne and Batman.
For an exclusive interview about the Batman films with Michael Uslan, originator and executive producer of the movie franchise, check out our website, uptownradio.org. You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come. Stay with us.
I'm Maddie Foley.
And I'm Maggie Green.
Coming up, New York City is considering removing some of its oldest fossil fuel power plants in favor of renewable energy.
And Batman is turning 80 years old, so we called a superhero-ologist to chat about his legacy.
But first, these headlines.
Today, 1 million protesters flooded the streets of Algiers. Tear gas and rubber bullets were fired in at least one location after protesters hurled stones at police. This protest is the largest outpouring since unrest started 6 weeks ago. The protesters are demanding the immediate removal of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. The 82-year-old has held the position for 2 decades. The protesters want him and the entire regime gone, claiming the elite military rulers are corrupt.
Once again, we have been unable to support leaving the European Union in an orderly fashion. The implications of the House's decision are grave.
This afternoon, British lawmakers rejected Prime Minister Theresa May's third withdrawal agreement. This comes 3 years after the Brexit vote. May addressed Parliament earlier today. The European Union Commission says, given the recent defeat, a no-deal Brexit on April 12th is now likely. The U.S. and China concluded trade talks in Beijing today. The world's 2 largest economies are trying to resolve a 9-month trade war. The talks marked the first face-to-face meeting between the countries since President Trump delayed a hike in tariffs early this month. Chicago police want Jussie Smollett to reimburse them $130,000 for its investigation. Charges against Smollett were dropped earlier this week after police claimed he filed a false report. Health officials in the Democratic Republic of the Congo reported 15 new cases of Ebola today. That marks the biggest rise since the current outbreak was declared last August. the second largest in history. Slovakia is on course to electing its first female president. According to opinion polling, Zuzana Čaputová is winning by a wide margin. She has voiced support of the LGBTQ+ community, which marks a turning point for one of Europe's most socially conservative countries. And French film director Agnès Varda died today in Paris. The 90-year-old filmmaker broke new ground in the 1960s with films like Cleo from 5 to 7. She was most recently nominated for an Academy Award in 2017 for Faces, Places. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Stephanie Horton.
Yet another Brexit deadline was missed today. British lawmakers had to negotiate a plan to leave the European Union. But with tensions high and no resolution in sight, they got a 2-week extension to decide for good whether the UK wants in or out.
Meanwhile, as Allie Swenson reports, there's another separatist movement brewing, right here in New York State.
When you arrive at the Albany bus terminal, it's immediately clear. You're not in Manhattan anymore. At this one-room transit station, country music blasts over the speakers. Down the street, hotel doors welcome guests inside with decals that read, "Howdy, y'all." Albany's population would fit inside New York City more than 80 times. Albany is just 3 hours north of Manhattan, but it feels like part of a different state entirely. And if a new bill in the state assembly passes, it might as well be.
It's been talked about. No one's ever had the guts to actually put it into a bill and say, you know what, this is a law, let's actually move it.
Assemblyman David DiPietro is from upstate New York. His bill is the first to propose splitting the state into 3 independent regions. The 5 boroughs would keep the name New York. Downstate suburbs and Long Island would be called Montauk. Upstate, where DiPietro lives, would be called New Amsterdam. The federal government would still count it all as one state, but each region would get its own governor, legislature, and court system. DiPietro thinks this will solve a problem he's been having in state budget talks.
New York City is now dominating every piece of legislation, resolution, motion, and law that comes on the Assembly and the Senate floor.
The complaint is a persistent one upstate. While downstate has enjoyed new jobs and grown its economy, upstate lawmakers say they aren't sharing in the spoils. They say big city policies threaten jobs in their smaller communities. One example, Governor Andrew Cuomo wants to close state prisons, but in some northern districts, they're the biggest employers. DiPietro thinks upstate would be better off with more independence.
The jobs will fly in here. We will no longer be the laughingstock of the country. We will have economic boon like there is in the best parts of this country.
The nonprofit Fiscal Policy Institute disagrees. It says the upstate economy depends on tax revenue from its downstate neighbors. Either way, the bill has almost no chance of passing. But that doesn't stop DiPietro and others from romanticizing the idea of leaving New York City behind. Last month, in a different effort, Assemblyman Stephen Hawley proposed putting state secession to a public vote. And members of community groups like Divide New York and Unshackle Upstate have been dreaming about it for years. University of Tennessee professor Glenn Reynolds has studied what happens when states try to split up.
There's a tide in the affairs of men, as Julius Caesar says, and right now, worldwide, the tide seems to sort of be favoring breakups.
Reynolds says that over the past few years, separation movements have been gaining steam. In the UK, there's Brexit. In Spain, the Catalonia region voted to leave 2 years ago and is still fighting to make that happen. And here in the U.S., California's independence movement has gotten so big, it has a nickname, Cal Exit.
There are a number of efforts to escape what people see as sort of distant and unsympathetic government.
But here in New York, the separation movement is coming from the government, or more specifically, politicians. For upstate lawmakers, it can be a powerful political tool. New York State Business Council executive Ken Pekulski.
Part of the equation is it sells politically. I say, let's split upstate and downstate, you get people's attention. I think everybody, including the most ardent supporters, understand it's not going to happen.
Governor Cuomo did not respond to requests for comment. For now, as long as New York State stays intact, Pekulski says downstate lawmakers should pay attention to upstate needs. Unlike Brexit advocates who want to leave the EU, upstaters don't want to secede. They just want to send a message. They're New Yorkers, too. Allie Swenson, Columbia Radio News.
95% of New York State's electricity comes from fossil fuels. As Shannon Lynn reports, the city is considering closing some of its oldest and dirtiest plants and moving towards renewable energy.
Crossing the Roosevelt Island Bridge into Long Island City, 4 smokestacks painted like candy canes come into view. They belong to the Ravenswood Generating Station. That's a small-sized generator that is designed to turn on quickly when demand for power is high. They are known as peaker plants. New York City has 16 peaker plants located mostly along the waterfront. About half of New York City's power is produced in Queens. That also means higher levels of air pollution, according to city data. In Long Island City, it is especially a problem. There, most people live below the poverty line. They're predominantly Black and Hispanic. Studies have shown that people of color live in some of the most polluted neighborhoods in the nation.
And the air quality out here is terrible. I mean, I was told that because of all the industrial buildings out here, it can also trigger a lot for me.
That's Kathy Warren. She lives about 2 blocks from the Ravenswood plant with her husband and 2 children. Warren has asthma.
I've always had respiratory issues and allergies ever since I was younger. But when I moved out here in 2010, I noticed that I finally fully got diagnosed with asthma.
According to a city report from 2015, Long Island City has the highest level of something called PM 2.5. PM stands for particulate matter, which are fine-grained pollutants. When inhaled, they can lead to lung problems. Matt Perzanowski is a professor at Columbia University's School of Public Health. He says that power generators, including peaker plants, that burn fossil fuel create PM 2.5.
And you can see these big black plumes of smoke coming up from buildings, and that then settles down into the air around communities. And so if you're a New York City resident and you run your finger along the windowsill and it comes up black, that's this combustion byproduct. Environment
New York, an environmental advocacy nonprofit, ranked the Ravenswood plant as the state's largest carbon polluter in 2014. City Council is now looking at a bill that will eventually pave the way to replace the city's peaker plants with renewable energy sources. Rachel Spector is a lawyer at the nonprofit New York Lawyers for Public Interest. She says the bill will fund a feasibility study on replacing all gas-based power plants.
But peakers are like the low-hanging fruit here. It's in the very short term, it's totally feasible, both economically and technologically, to transition off gas-fired peaker plants and just use renewables plus storage.
Arthur Kremer is with the New York Affordable Reliable Electricity Alliance, an energy lobby group. He says that to completely remove peaker plants would be short-sighted.
So it's not like you can eliminate them unless you have the other megawatts to replace them, and I think that's questionable. Peakers are a fact of life.
That's the sound of peaker plants when they're not operating to their full capacity. Kathy Warren says whenever the peaker plants are running at full steam, they make loud pops and bangs. She says her allergies get a lot worse. Sometimes she has to skip work.
I do have a well-controlled, inhaler and things like that to help me out. But every now and again, my allergies, there's nothing really I can do about it.
Warren is figuring out how to make the air in her home safer for her and her children. Her daughter is now showing signs of asthma, so she's saving up for an air purifier. Shannon Lynn, Columbia Radio News.
A new exhibit at the City Museum of New York celebrates the bicycle. But the bicycle has a fraught urban history.
As Hannah Critchfield reports, New Yorkers have long fought over the bicycle's place in the city.
Exactly 200 years ago, the first bike came to New York City. It was called the Velocipede. It didn't have pedals, it didn't have brakes. You had to go down a hill just to ride it. And right away, it freaked people out. It was banned from the streets within months.
And that begins a very long history of restricting, limiting, curbing, marginalizing the bicycle.
That's Evan Friss. He's co-curator of Cycling in the City, a 200-year history, a new exhibit at the City Museum of New York. The show follows the history of tension around the bicycle's place and purpose in New York City. Friss says that a lot of this contention comes from warring ideas about what the bike should be. Is it for leisure or labor?
There's this constant tension between, can it be both a vehicle that's privileged for its utilitarian value and also be embraced for its social and recreational value.
Today, biking is wildly popular in New York City. On an average morning, 3,000 bikers crossed the Brooklyn Bridge into Manhattan. The number of daily cycling trips in the city is 3 times what it was just 15 years ago. But as the exhibition makes clear, the tension over bikes continues.
The growth of cycling kind of violates people's expectations of how people are supposed to move through space, even if the cyclists aren't causing harm.
That's Do Lee, an environmental psychologist who researches working cyclists in the city.
A lot of the ways that people described it is this sense of invasion.
These ideas are old, but the exhibit shows that the modern-day conflict around bikes in the city came out of a very specific event. It's the 1980s, and New York City Mayor Ed Koch takes a trip to China.
He visits China, he sees bicycling, and he decides New York, to be a modern city, is going to use bicycles.
That's Donald Albrecht, curator of architecture and design at the museum. Mayor Koch began encouraging cycling and established bike lanes. He imagined a cleaner, quieter New York City, free of gridlock. But then came the bike messengers, around 5,000 of them.
They're obviously using the bicycle for work, and they're very different than most of the other cyclists. 3/4 of them are probably not white, either African American or Latino. They're young, and of course they become stereotyped as aggressive riders who are reckless.
Amid outcries of their danger, in 1987 Koch cracked down, proposing an outright ban on bike riding during the day in Midtown Manhattan.
The bicycle messengers fight back.
What do we want? When do we want it? Now! When do we want it? Now!
They protest on the city streets, and they win. And that's a key moment when the bicycle shifts from being a mode of recreation to a mode of work and commuting and transportation.
The bike ban was repealed, but curators say the current debates around bikes in the city all started in that moment in the 80s. Next to the bike messenger display, a documentary plays. It's about food delivery cyclists, the majority of them Chinese immigrants, who have spent the last few months fighting for the city to legalize the bikes they use.
There's all sorts of other ways to deliver food, but we're not going to allow e-bikes.
A lot of the language against the delivery people and e-bikes is reminiscent of debates against the bike messengers in the 1980s.
Friss says it's worth examining this history. It tells us about why people feel the way they do about bicycles today.
How we think of it then shapes where we think it belongs and how we regulate it and whether we promote it or not.
Cycling in the City, a 200-year history, is open now through October 6th. Hannah Critchfield, Columbia Radio News.
A&A Bakes and Doubles, a family-owned Trinidadian restaurant in Brooklyn, has won a James Beard Award. The category, America's Classics, is given to local restaurants that have been in the business for more than 10 years. For a restaurant, it's like winning the food Oscars. But as Andrea Salcido finds out, awards may also come with some drawbacks.
When you walk into A&A Bakes and Doubles in Bed-Stuy, the soca music booming from the restaurant speakers immediately takes you to the Caribbean. A glass case with fried flatbreads and spicy sauces sits on top of the counter. It's a typical Saturday. The line at times reaches the door. Aisha Shillingford lives down the street. She's thrilled about the award, but she also has some concerns.
I thought it was cool for anything from my country to be getting recognition, especially a small local business. And I also felt trepidation that it would mean that this stuff will get gentrified.
And the newcomers are easy to spot. They stare at the menu, puzzled. They're not familiar with the restaurant's specialty, doubles. Fried bread wrapped around savory fillings like shrimp or veggies. A couple of clients walk in and shake their heads before deciding it's too packed today. They're not willing to wait. Most of the restaurant's customers have Caribbean roots, like Shillingford.
I don't want to come here and the line is full of hipsters and I can't get any food.
Some customers worry the award means prices will go up. Now, doubles are as cheap as $1.50. Shillingford says her worry is the restaurant will become crowded with customers who don't value the food the same way she does.
For us, it means a lot to be able to get food from home that we don't make at home.
Navia Dev is one of the new customers. She came after hearing about the award.
I think these awards highlight local communities and
people who have shops that don't necessarily have like this crazy experience. It's just about the food, and I think that's really awesome.
I've talked to some people and they say, you know, I worry that they're trying to like hype my local food. Do you see an issue with that? Or
I think at a certain point that goes away, and then you're back to like your solid customer base. This is going to create maybe some consistent customers that are continuing to come back for the food.
Mireya Loza teaches classes on the intersection of food and culture at NYU. She says awards have concrete benefits. Restaurants can expand, renovate, and offer new dishes. But there are also downsides, like self-proclaimed foodies.
Oftentimes, these foodies complain about service, about ambiance. They complain about basically the core culture of the ethnic restaurant that they're arriving to.
Loza says new customers entering a small ethnic restaurant should be respectful of the culture that may not be their own.
No one wants to feel like they're in a zoo.
Jody Stefano is a food writer and culinary tour guide based in Queens. He agrees with Loza.
You're there to enjoy the food because it's great, not to get your next Instagram merit badge.
Back at A&A Bakes and Doubles, Gita Brown, a co-owner, says she's happy. The award is attracting more customers and putting her home country back on the map. She says she has no plans to raise prices. As for some customers who are worried about all the attention,
some are displeased, yes, but try our best to please everyone, all our customers.
Chantal Luison is a regular, and she orders fast. She says she loves the food so much, no matter how busy it gets, she'll keep coming in.
Oh my God, I love y'all food. Y'all understand. Y'all have got me through like my breakups, my divorces. Y'all have got me through life. I can't imagine not eating doubles every week.
Rushing to the door, Luison grabs 8 doubles to go. She says she's happy to share her culture, as long as the restaurant has enough doubles for her. Andrea Salcido, Columbia Radio News.
To end our show, reporter Maddie Foley tells us the story of her longest, most stable relationship and how she decided to cut it out from her life.
Tucked away in my desk is the first award I ever won. The circle of red construction paper is faded now, where a row of long-lost star stickers once glittered. The 2 red, white, and blue ribbons that hang off the bottom are raggedy and bent and a little dusty. I brought that award home pinned to my day camp shirt, the summer between kindergarten and 1st grade. Best Hair is printed neatly in Sharpie across the handmade awards center. My whole life, my hair has been my defining physical feature. By the time I was 3 years old, I was cross-eyed, sporting bright purple bifocal glasses that took up half my face. When my adult teeth grew in, there were big gaps between each tooth, and the front 2 stuck out. I was scrawny, too, always the shortest in my class. But I had long, thick, curly hair, the color of a penny. I was born with a head full of it. That's one of my mom's favorite anecdotes. My first haircut wasn't until the 3rd grade. My hair and I grew up together. It became a security blanket, one I could hide behind, literally, when I felt insecure about the rest of myself. Some days, I would wear my hair in one long braid. I would run around the playground, whipping my braid back and forth menacingly like a rope. Other times, I had 2 big buns on top of my head like cat ears. Once in a while, I'd just wear my hair down, swishing like a mermaid's tail. I wondered sometimes what would happen if I just cut off all my hair. Tucking my ponytail into the back of my shirt, I'd look in the mirror. Who would I be to my friends if it wasn't Rapunzel or Ariel the Mermaid or Pippi Longstocking? How would people describe me if it wasn't that girl with the big hair? At the time, one of my favorite movies was the Little Women adaptation from the 90s. There's this scene where the main character, Jo, is desperate for money to buy a train ticket, so she pawns her only thing of value.
I sold my hair.
Jo, how could you? You're one beauty.
You're one beauty. My question answered itself, so I kept my hair long. I kept my hair long through high school and college. I kept my hair long through office jobs in Washington, D.C. and restaurant gigs in Chicago. 2 years ago, I got into grad school and moved to New York. I kept my hair long then, too. Since then, I got a job, and then another job. I started taking the train through Manhattan and Brooklyn and Queens almost every day for work. I got an apartment, a 6th-floor walk-up. From the fire escape, you can see the Midtown high-rises glittering against the sky. I spend a lot of time out there on the fire escape, looking at the lights. I like imagining all the hundreds of thousands of people who turn those lights on, a big, fast-moving, hard-working community. And I like remembering that I'm part of that community now, too. Something I had dreamed about all those years ago on the playground. A few months ago, I was back in the hair salon I grew up going to. Busy with other things, I'd been wearing my hair in a big pile on top of my head. It was full of knots and split ends. "It's just too heavy," I said when I made the appointment. I told the stylist I wanted my hair short, really short. The shortest it's been since my hair first started growing. And for an hour, I watched over 2 decades of an identity fall onto the floor. I looked in the mirror, and I was still there. Maddie Foley, Uptown Radio.
Well, that does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our executive producer today was Cynthia Betubiza. Leading our staff of reporters were senior producers Moira Warburton and Sophia Amati.
Director Rebecca Ward coordinated our studio production with Allie Swenson and Alex Coletta.
Our web team, Lauren Lantry, got this streamed live to the web. Andrea Salcido and Stephanie Horton produced the news. Senior editor Bianca Giacoboni and assistant editor Shannon Lynn led our copy team.
Our instructors Joanne Farian, Sally Herships, and Ben Shapiro advised our staff. I'm Maggie Green.
And I'm Maddie Foley. Uptown Radio is live on Fridays at 4. Until next time, you can always find us on uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.